They saw a suspect. He saw his subordinates. In the quiet, affluent suburb of Oakhaven, 2 aggressive officers thought they had caught a burglar red-handed. They ignored his calm demeanor, they mocked his expensive suit, and they refused to look at the ID in his pocket. They thought they were cleaning up the streets, but they were about to make the biggest mistake of their careers. Because the man they were shoving into the back of a squad car wasn't a criminal. He was the newly appointed chief of police, and he was taking mental notes. This is the story of how arrogance met authority, and the brutal karma that followed. The morning sun over Oakhaven was the kind of bright that promised a scorching afternoon. It was a Sunday, 9 a.m., the time when the wealthy residents of the Westwood district were usually sipping espressos behind gated driveways or teeing off at the country club. The streets were lined with ancient oaks, their branches creating a canopy over manicured lawns that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. Isaiah Sterling stood on the driveway of 4402 Crestview Lane, a sprawling mid-century modern home that had sat empty for 6 months. Isaiah was a man who occupied space with a natural, quiet gravity. Standing at 6'2", with graying temples and a build that suggested decades of discipline, he didn't look like a man who trespassed. He looked like a man who owned things. Today, he was dressed in civilian casual, a pair of dark navy slacks, a crisp white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and leather loafers. He held a clipboard in one hand and a tape measure in the other. He had just closed on the house 48 hours ago. The sold sign hadn't been put up yet, a clerical error by the realtor, Mrs. Galloway. But Isaiah didn't mind. He liked the anonymity. He was enjoying his last few hours of being just Isaiah before Monday morning rolled around. On Monday, he would be sworn in as the new chief of police for the Oakhaven department, brought in specifically to clean up a precinct rumored to be rife with corruption, laziness, and unchecked aggression. He was currently measuring the width of the garage door, humming a low tune, thinking about whether his vintage Mustang would fit comfortably. A block away, a black and white patrol cruiser idled at a stop sign. Inside sat Officer Kyle Brody and his partner, Officer Sean Higgins. They were the definition of the old guard within the department, not in age but in mentality. Brody was 32, thick-necked, with a buzz cut and a habit of chewing on toothpicks. Higgins was older, softer around the middle, with a mustache that had gone out of style in the 90s and eyes that always looked suspicious. "Quiet morning," Higgins grumbled, scrolling through his phone. "Too quiet." Brody tapped the steering wheel. "I like quiet. Quiet means I can finish my coffee." He glanced out the window and narrowed his eyes as they rolled past Crestview Lane. He hit the brakes, the car jerking slightly. "What?" Higgins looked up. 44402, Brody said, pointing a finger. "That place has been empty for months. Galloway listed it for $1.2 million. Higgins squinted. "Yeah? So?" "So there's a guy in the driveway. Maybe the realtor is showing it." Brody scoffed. "On a Sunday before 10, without a car in the driveway? Nah, look at him." They watched Isaiah from down the street. Isaiah was now kneeling, checking the pavement for cracks. "Black male. Checking the perimeter," Brody muttered, his hand already drifting toward the radio. "Probably casing it for copper wiring, or checking for alarm sensors. We've had those break-ins over in East Oakhaven." "East Oakhaven is 5 miles away, Brody," Higgins said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Mobility moves fast," Brody snapped. "I'm calling it in. Suspicious individual. Possible B&E in progress." Brody didn't wait for dispatch to confirm. He flipped on the lights. No siren, just the silent, aggressive flash of red and blue, and gunned the engine. The cruiser roared up the incline of Crestview Lane, tires crunching gravel as Brody pulled sharply into the driveway, blocking the exit. Isaiah didn't flinch. He didn't run. He simply stood up, dusted off his knees, and watched the cruiser with a calm, analytical gaze. He saw the aggressive parking job. He saw the way the doors flew open before the car had fully settled. He saw the hands hovering near holsters. Observation 1, Isaiah thought. Failure to assess threat level. Immediate escalation. "Step away from the garage. Hands where I can see them," Brody shouted, bypassing the usual "good morning" or "can I help you" entirely. Isaiah held his clipboard loosely at his side. He made no sudden moves. "Good morning, officers. Is there a problem?" "I said hands." Brody was already around the hood of the car, his hand resting heavily on his taser. Higgins was flanking from the left, looking nervous but following his partner's lead. Isaiah slowly raised his hands to chest height, palms open. He kept the clipboard in his left hand. "I'm the homeowner. I bought this property on Friday." Brody let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You? You bought this place?" He looked Isaiah up and down, his eyes lingering on the linen shirt with a sneer. "Sure you did, buddy. And I'm the mayor of New York. Drop the clipboard. Now." "Officer," Isaiah said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the resonant timbre of command that had silenced riots in Detroit years prior. "My identification is in my back right pocket. My deed of sale is in the glove box of my car, which is parked around the corner because the driveway is being sealed next week. If you'll let me—" "I told you to drop the clipboard!" Brody screamed, closing the distance. "Do not reach for your pockets!" "I am not reaching," Isaiah said, his eyes locking onto Brody's badge number. "Officer K. Brody, badge Norfolk 92. "Noted. I am communicating with you. I am Chief—" "Shut up!" Higgins yelled, trying to match his partner's intensity. "Turn around. Hands on the garage door. Do it now, or you're getting tased." Isaiah paused. He had a choice here. He could scream, he could fight, or he could let them dig their own graves. He looked at Brody, saw the adrenaline-fueled dilation of the pupils, the complete lack of professional curiosity. These men weren't investigating a crime. They were hunting a trophy. Isaiah slowly turned around and placed his hands on the warm metal of the garage door. "Spread 'em," Brody commanded. As Isaiah spread his feet, he felt Brody's rough hands patting him down, far more aggressively than necessary. Brody kicked Isaiah's ankles apart, wider, causing him to slip slightly. "There's a wallet," Higgins called out. "Back pocket." "Leave it," Brody spat. "We'll process him at the station. Get the cuffs." "Officer," Isaiah said, his face pressed against the garage door, "I strongly suggest you check that wallet. It will save you a career's worth of regret." "You threatening me, boy?" Brody whispered it, right in Isaiah's ear. The slur wasn't explicit, but the tone was heavy with it. "You think you're the first guy to try and talk his way out of a B&E? You're going for a ride." The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked onto Isaiah's wrists. They were tight. Too tight. Observation 2, Isaiah thought, closing his eyes briefly. Failure to verify suspect identity. Excessive force. Bias-based profiling. "You're making a mistake, Officer Brody," Isaiah said calmly. "The only mistake was you thinking you belong in this neighborhood," Brody replied, yanking Isaiah back by the handcuffs. The back of the patrol car smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. The hard plastic seat was unforgiving. Isaiah sat awkwardly, his hands numb behind his back. The plexiglass divider separated him from the two men who were currently congratulating themselves on their bust. As the cruiser pulled out of the driveway, Isaiah watched his new home disappear from view. He shifted his shoulders, testing the flexibility of the cuffs. "Did you see the look on his face?" Higgins chuckled from the passenger seat, though his laughter sounded forced. claiming he bought the place. I've heard I'm the gardener, or I'm the contractor, but I own it. That's bold. They always lie, Brodie said, steering with one hand, his other arm resting on the open window frame. He probably broke in through the back, didn't find any jewelry, and came out to check the garage. We probably spooked him before he could load up. Isaiah stared at the back of Brodie's head. Officer Brodie, he spoke clearly through the grate. Zip it back there, Brodie said, checking the rearview mirror. You have the right to remain silent, so use it. I am aware of my rights. I am also aware of yours, Isaiah said. And the procedures outlined in the Oakhaven PD Manual of Operations, specifically Section 4, subsection C, regarding the verification of property ownership prior to arrest. Higgins turned around in his seat, eyebrows raised. Listen to the lawyer back here. You watch a lot of TV, pal? I don't watch TV, Isaiah replied. I write policy. I'm asking you one last time to pull over and check my ID. If you bring me into the station in cuffs, the chain of events that follows will be irreversible. Brodie slammed his hand on the steering wheel. You know what? I'm tacking on resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. Keep talking, please. I need the overtime. I am not resisting, Isaiah said. I am informing. What's your name? Higgins asked, a shred of doubt finally creeping into his voice. The suspect was too calm. He spoke too well. Most guys back there were screaming, crying, or banging their heads on the glass. This guy was sitting like he was in a boardroom meeting. My name is Isaiah Sterling. Sterling, Higgins muttered. Sounds familiar. Probably from the wanted list, Brodie interjected. Look, we book him. We toss him in holding, and we let the detectives sort it out on Monday. I want to get lunch. Isaiah leaned back. He had given them 3 chances, 3 explicit opportunities to do the bare minimum of police work. They had refused every single one. The anger was there, burning low in his gut, the humiliation of being handled like a criminal in his own driveway. But the cold, hard strategist in him was taking over. He thought about the phone call he had received last week from the mayor, Patricia Vance. We have a culture problem, Isaiah, she had said. The statistics are bad. The morale is low. The community doesn't trust us. I need you to clean house. He hadn't expected to start the cleaning before he even got his badge, but efficiency was one of his virtues. Officer Higgins, Isaiah said, addressing the passenger. You seem like a man who follows his partner's lead. That's dangerous. When the internal affairs review happens, the I was just following orders defense rarely holds up against a civil rights violation. Shut up, Brodie shouted. Last warning. You have a dash cam recording this? Isaiah asked. And body cams active? Yeah, we got it all on tape, Brodie sneered. Great evidence for the DA. Excellent, Isaiah whispered. Don't delete it. The cruiser slowed as they approached the precinct, a brick fortress in the center of town. It was Sunday, so the shift was light. As they pulled into the Sally Port, the garage door rumbling shut behind them, Isaiah prepared himself. This was the moment of maximum exposure. He would be walked through the booking area. Other officers would see him. Civilians would see him. Brodie got out and yanked the back door open. He grabbed Isaiah by the arm, hauling him out. Let's go. Watch your head. He didn't actually help Isaiah watch his head. He shoved him down. They walked him through the heavy steel doors and into the processing area. The air conditioning was humming loudly. What do we have? Called out the desk sergeant. It was Sergeant Annabelle Thorne, a 20-year veteran with grey hair tied in a tight bun and glasses perched on the end of her nose. She didn't look up from her paperwork immediately. B&E on Crestview, Brodie announced proudly, shoving Isaiah toward the counter. caught him casing the place, claimed he lived there. On a Sunday? Thorne sighed, finally looking up. Did you verify? She stopped. Her pen dropped from her hand. It hit the desk with a sharp clack that echoed in the sudden silence of the room. Thorne's eyes went wide behind her glasses. She looked at Isaiah. Then she looked at the handcuffs. Then she looked at Brody, her face draining of all color until she looked like a ghost. Brody, Thorne whispered, her voice trembling. Yeah, Sarge? Just need the booking sheets, Brody said, oblivious. He was digging for the keys to the handcuffs, not to take them off, but to adjust them to the booking bar. Isaiah stood tall, despite the cuffs. He looked Sergeant Thorne dead in the eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Brody, Thorne said again, louder this time. She stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. Take those cuffs off, right now. What? Brody frowned. Sarge, he's a flight risk. He was aggressive. I was not aggressive, Isaiah said calmly. Take them off, Thorne screamed, her voice cracking. The entire booking room stopped. 2 other officers by the coffee machine froze. Why? Brody demanded, his ego flaring up. You don't undercut me in front of a perp, Annabelle? That is not a perp, you idiot. Thorne came around the desk, her hands shaking as she pointed at Isaiah. Do you know who that is? Yeah, Isaiah Sterling. He told us. Isaiah Sterling, Thorne repeated, looking at Brody with a mixture of pity and horror. As in, Chief Isaiah Sterling. Brody froze. The key in his hand stopped halfway to the lock. The new chief? Higgins squeaked from behind them. He starts tomorrow, Thorne said, her eyes locked on Isaiah's. Mayor Vance sent the memo on Friday. His photo is on the bulletin board right behind you, Brody. Brody didn't turn around. He couldn't. His body seemed to have turned to stone. He looked at the black man he had shoved, ridiculed, and arrested. He looked at the suit. He looked at the calm, terrifying patience in Isaiah's eyes. Chief? Brody choked out. Isaiah smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You can take them off now, Officer Brody. I think we have some work to do. The silence in the precinct was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums. The air conditioning hummed, a monotonous drone that seemed to amplify the sound of Officer Kyle Brody's breathing. It was ragged, shallow, the breath of a man realizing he had just stepped off a cliff. Brody's hands shook violently as he tried to fit the small key into the handcuffs. He scratched the metal against the lock twice before he managed to slide it in. Click. The ratchet released. Isaiah Sterling didn't rub his wrists immediately. He didn't wince. He simply lowered his arms, allowing the blood to flow back into his hands, and turned slowly to face the 2 officers. The red marks on his dark skin were visible, raw indictments of Brody's grip. My wallet, Isaiah said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the room like a scalpel. Higgins scrambled. He practically fell over his own feet, rushing to the counter where he had dumped Isaiah's personal effects. He grabbed the leather wallet with trembling fingers and held it out with 2 hands, like an offering to a deity. Here, sir. Chief. We didn't know, Higgins stammered, sweat beading on his upper lip. Isaiah took the wallet. He opened it methodically. He pulled out his badge, the gold shield of the chief of police, and held it up. The light caught the metal, flashing directly into Brody's eyes. You didn't know because you didn't look, Isaiah said. You didn't look because you had already decided who I was. Isn't that right, Officer Brody? Brody was pale, his bravado stripped away, leaving behind a terrified bully. I was following protocol for a potential burglary in progress. The neighborhood, you know how it is. No, Isaiah stepped closer. He was inches from Brody's face now. Isaiah smelled of expensive cologne and steel. Brody smelled of fear and stale sweat. "Tell me, how is it? Explain to me why a homeowner, standing in his own driveway, warrants a felony stop without verification." "You didn't have keys," Brody whispered, his eyes darting to Sergeant Thorne for help. She offered none. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression one of grim satisfaction. She had warned Brody about his temper for years. "I had a keypad," Isaiah corrected, "and I had a voice, which you ignored." Isaiah turned to Sergeant Thorne. "Sergeant, what is the protocol when a suspect is brought in?" "Booking, sir," Thorne replied instantly, snapping to attention. "Fingerprints, mugshot, holding cell. And prior to that, establishment of probable cause and identity verification." "Correct." Isaiah looked back at the two officers. "Since you failed to do your job on the street, we are going to finish this interaction properly. But the roles are going to change. Sergeant Thorne?" "Yes, Chief." "Place officers Brody and Higgins in interrogation room 1. Do not let them speak to each other. Do not let them use their phones. I want their service weapons and badges on your desk in 5 minutes." "Wait." Brody stepped back, his hand instinctively going to his belt. "You can't do that. We have union rights. You can't put us in the box." Isaiah's eyes narrowed. "I am not arresting you, Officer Brody. Not yet. This is an administrative review of a critical incident. As your commanding officer, I am ordering you to sit in a room and wait for me. Unless you would prefer I process you for assault, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights right now. I can call the district attorney. He's a friend of mine. I'm sure he'd pick up on a Sunday." The threat hung in the air. The civilian they had bullied was gone. In his place was a titan of law enforcement who knew the penal code better than they knew their own addresses. Brody looked at Higgins. Higgins was already unbuckling his gun belt, tears welling in his eyes. Higgins knew when the ship was sinking. Brody clenched his jaw, a vein throbbing in his neck, but he slowly unclipped his holster. He slammed his gun onto the counter with a loud thud. "Gently," Isaiah warned. "That is government property." Brody slammed his badge down next to it. "This is bull," he muttered. "Room 1, Isaiah pointed. "Now." As the two officers were marched away by a stunned Sergeant Thorne, Isaiah finally allowed himself a moment of humanity. He leaned against the booking desk and let out a long, slow exhale. His wrists burned. He looked down at the red abrasions. He pulled his phone from his pocket. He had one call to make before he went into that room. "Mayor Vance," he said, when the line connected. "Isaiah?" Her voice was cheerful. "I thought you were moving in today. Everything okay?" "We have a situation, Patricia," Isaiah said, his voice flat. "I need you at the precinct, and bring the head of internal affairs. I just got arrested." "You... what?" "I was arrested in my own driveway by 2 of your officers. I'm currently at the station. I've relieved them of duty, but this is about to get very ugly, very fast. I want to get ahead of the media cycle." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of car keys jingling. "I'm 10 minutes out. Don't kill them before I get there, Isaiah." "No promises," he whispered, hanging up. The conference room at the Oakhaven precinct was usually reserved for budget meetings and retirement parties. Today, it felt like a courtroom. Mayor Patricia Vance sat at the head of the table. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, known for her no-nonsense politics, but today she looked physically ill. To her right sat Captain Marcus Reed, the head of internal affairs, a man with a face like a bulldog and a reputation for eating corrupt cops for breakfast. And at the other end of the table sat Brody and Higgins. They weren't in handcuffs, but they looked smaller than they ever had in their lives. They were stripped of their utility belts, their uniforms looking baggy and ridiculous without the equipment. Isaiah stood at the front of the room, next to a large monitor. He had changed into a fresh shirt brought from his car, but he had rolled the sleeves up intentionally. The bruising on his wrists was turning a dark, angry purple. He wanted them to see it. "We've pulled the body cam footage," Captain Reed grunted, tapping a laptop. "And the dash cam. I want to play it, for the record." "We know what happened," Brody muttered, staring at the table. "Do you?" Isaiah asked. "Because in your report, which you started drafting in the car, you mentioned aggressive behavior and resisting. Let's see if the camera agrees." Reed hit play. The video started. The sunny street, the quiet driveway, the sudden acceleration of the cruiser. "Look at him," Brody's voice came through the speakers, tinny but clear. "Black male, checking the perimeter." Mayor Vance flinched. She looked at Isaiah, then at Brody. "He was checking for cracks in the pavement," she said softly. The video continued, the aggressive stop, the screaming. "I'm the homeowner." Isaiah's voice on the tape was calm, reasonable. "Sure you are, buddy. And I'm the mayor of New York." Brody's voice sneered. In the quiet conference room, the sarcasm sounded pathetic. It sounded weak. Brody squeezed his eyes shut. He couldn't watch. Then came the physical confrontation. The video showed Isaiah complying, turning around, placing his hands on the door. It showed Brody kicking his legs apart violently. It showed the excessive force used to crank the arms back. "You threatening me, boy?" The slur hung in the room. Captain Reed paused the video. The frame froze on Brody's face, inches from Isaiah's ear, his expression twisted in hate. "Boy," Captain Reed repeated. He looked at Brody. "You used a racially charged diminutive against a suspect who was complying. That alone is a suspension. But let's keep going." They watched the ride to the station. They listened to Isaiah citing the policy manual. They listened to Higgins laughing at him. "Listen to the lawyer back here," Higgins had said. Higgins put his head in his hands. "I didn't mean. I was just—" "You were just what, Officer Higgins?" Isaiah asked. "Just going along to get along? That's the culture Mayor Vance hired me to kill. The silence of the good cops is what allows the bad cops to thrive. You are just as guilty." The video ended with the revelation in the booking room, the look on Sergeant Thorne's face, the silence. Mayor Vance stood up. She walked over to the window, looking out at the town she was supposed to lead. "This is a PR nightmare," she said. "If this leaks, if the community sees this—" "It won't leak from me," Isaiah said. "I'm not interested in a lawsuit. I'm interested in a solution." "What do you want, Isaiah?" Vance asked. Isaiah turned to the two officers. "I want their badges. Permanently." "Now wait a minute." Brody shot up from his chair. "You can't fire us for one mistake. I have a clean record. I have commendations." "You have a clean record because your previous victims didn't have the power to pull the tapes," Isaiah shot back. "You think this was your first time? I saw how comfortable you were. I saw the muscle memory. You've done this 100 times. You profile, you escalate, you arrest, and then you drop the charges later to avoid the paperwork, leaving some innocent man with a trauma record." "You have no proof of that," Brody yelled. "I'm opening a review into every arrest you've made in the last 5 years," Captain Reed interjected calmly. "Every resisting arrest charge, every disorderly conduct. We're going to audit your entire career, Brody. And if I find a pattern, and I will find a pattern, you won't just be fired. You'll be indicted." Brody slumped back into his chair. The air had left him. "This is entrapment," Brody whispered. "You set us up. Standing in that driveway," Isaiah laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "I bought a house, officer. That is not entrapment. That is the American dream. The fact that you view a black man in a nice house as a setup is exactly why you cannot wear that uniform." Mayor Vance turned back to the table. "Officer Brody, Officer Higgins, you are hereby placed on unpaid administrative leave effective immediately, pending the conclusion of the internal investigation. Hand over your IDs." Higgins slid his ID across the table, weeping openly now. "I have a mortgage, Chief. Please, I have 2 kids." Isaiah looked at Higgins. There was no joy in this for him. "Then you should have thought about their father's integrity before you let your partner assault an innocent man." "Go home, Higgins." Brody didn't slide his ID. He stared at it. "You're ruining my life," he hissed at Isaiah. "No," Isaiah said, leaning in close, his voice dropping to that same terrifying register he had used in the car. "You ruined it yourself. I'm just the one turning on the lights." "Get them out of here," Reed ordered. 2 uniformed officers entered and escorted Brody and Higgins out. As the door closed, the room fell silent again. Isaiah sat down heavily. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him exhausted. "You okay?" Mayor Vance asked, putting a hand on his shoulder. "No," Isaiah admitted. "I'm not. That was a humiliation, Patricia. It doesn't matter how many stars I have on my collar. In that moment, I was just a body to them." "We'll fix this," she promised. "We have to," Isaiah said. "But the hard part is just starting. The union is going to fight this. The press is going to get wind of it. And Brody, a man like that doesn't go quietly. He's going to come after me." "Let him try," Reed said, closing his laptop. "He has no idea what he stepped in." "He knows," Isaiah said, looking at the door where Brody had exited. "But hate makes people stupid. He's going to try to discredit me. He's going to try to prove I was a criminal. He's going to dig." Isaiah stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Let him dig. He's only going to find the dirt he's standing on." "What's your next move, Chief?" Reed asked. Isaiah picked up his badge from the table and clipped it onto his belt, right next to where the handcuffs had been. "Tomorrow is Monday, my first official day. I'm going to call a department-wide meeting at 800 hours. I want every officer in this building to see my face. I want them to see the bruises on my wrists. And I'm going to tell them exactly what happened." He walked to the door. "And then," Isaiah said, looking back, "I'm going to finish unpacking my garage." Monday morning arrived with the weight of a storm front. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain, mirroring the mood inside the Oakhaven precinct briefing room. At 8:00 sharp, 50 officers stood in formation. The air was thick with rumors. Everyone had heard about Sunday. The text chains had been active all night. "Brody arrested the new chief." "Brody is gone. Is the new guy a hardliner?" When Isaiah Sterling walked in, the room didn't just go quiet, it went dead. He was in full uniform now, crisp, tailored, navy blue, with 4 gold stars on each collar and the gold badge gleaming on his chest. He didn't look like the man in the linen shirt from the driveway. He looked like a war machine. He walked to the podium, placing his hands on the edges. The sleeves of his uniform were short, revealing his forearms. He didn't hide the injuries. The dark purple bruising from the handcuffs wrapped around his wrists like bracelets of shame, stark against his skin. He let them look. He waited a full minute, his eyes scanning every face in the room. He saw fear in the rookies. He saw skepticism in the veterans. He saw anger in a few of the old boys who had been drinking buddies with Brody. "Look at my wrists," Isaiah said. His voice filled the room without a microphone. "Take a good look." No one moved. "This is not a badge of honor. This is a receipt," Isaiah continued. "A receipt for a transaction that happens too often in this town. Yesterday, 2 of your colleagues decided that my skin color was probable cause. They decided that my zip code was suspicious. They bypassed procedure, they bypassed logic, and they bypassed humanity. He stepped off the podium and walked into the aisle, moving between the rows of officers. "Officer Brody and Officer Higgins are gone," Isaiah said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "They are suspended. But I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking they were just doing their job. You're thinking the chief is soft. You're thinking the blue wall will protect us." He stopped in front of a burly sergeant who had his arms crossed defensively. Isaiah locked eyes with him. "Let me be clear. The blue wall has fallen. If you profile a citizen, you answer to me. If you use excessive force, you answer to me. If you turn off your body cam, you answer to me. I did not come here to make friends. I came here to make this department worthy of the badge. We are done being the biggest gang in Oakhaven." He turned back to the front. "Dismissed. Get to work." As the room scrambled to clear out, the energy was frantic. The message had been received, but not everyone was ready to listen. 3 miles away, in a dim, smoke-filled living room with the blinds drawn, Kyle Brody was pacing like a caged animal. He hadn't slept. An empty bottle of whiskey sat on the coffee table next to a pile of unpaid bills. His phone was in his hand. He had called the police union rep, Mike Dougherty, 5 times. Dougherty wasn't picking up. "Cowards!" Brody spat, kicking the sofa. "They're all cowards." Brody couldn't accept the reality. In his mind, he was the victim. He was the hero who had been tricked. "Sterling set me up," he told himself over and over until it became truth. "He wanted to embarrass me. He's probably a criminal anyway. You don't get that kind of money in Detroit without being dirty." Desperation breeds madness, and Brody was spiraling. He needed leverage. He needed to prove that Isaiah Sterling wasn't the saint he pretended to be. If he could find dirt, any dirt, he could trade it for his job back. He could blackmail the mayor. He scrolled through his contacts until he landed on a name he hadn't used in years: Caleb "Rat" Purnell. Caleb was a low-level snitch, a petty thief who operated out of a salvage yard in East Oakhaven. Brody had helped Caleb out of a few jams in the past, mostly by losing evidence in exchange for cash or information. Brody hit dial. "Yeah?" A raspy voice answered. "It's Brody. I need a favor. A big one." "I heard you got clipped, Brody." Caleb laughed. "Word on the street is you arrested the king. That's funny as hell." "Shut up, Caleb. I need eyes. I need you to find out where Sterling goes, who he talks to, and I need you to get me something specific." "What kind of something?" "The kind that puts people in prison," Brody whispered. "I know you still have access to the evidence lockers at the salvage yard. I need a drop. Unmarked. Heavy." There was a silence on the line. "You asking me to plant something on the chief of police? You got a death wish, man?" "I'm asking you to help me save my life," Brody said, his voice trembling with manic intensity. "I'll pay you, $5,000. Cash. I just need a bag of product. Coke, heroin, I don't care. Just enough to look like distribution weight." $5,000? Caleb paused. 10. And I want immunity on that catalytic converter beef." "Done," Brody said, though he had no power to grant immunity anymore. He didn't care. "Meet me at the old quarry in an hour." Brody hung up. A dark, twisted smile spread across his face. "You want to play by the book, Chief?" Brody thought. "Let's see how you handle a felony possession charge." The week dragged on. Tensions at the precinct were high. Isaiah was cleaning house, reviewing files, reassigning patrols, and firing 2 more officers who had history of misconduct. He was efficient, brutal, and terrifyingly calm. But Isaiah was also a man of instinct. He felt the crosshairs on his back. He knew men like Brody didn't just fade away. On Thursday night, Isaiah stayed late. His office was on the top floor, overlooking the parking lot. It was raining hard, the water hammering against the glass. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Watch your six. He's making a move tonight." Isaiah stared at the screen. He didn't reply. He didn't need to ask who he was. He had suspected Brody would try something, but he didn't know what. He stood up and turned off the lights in his office, standing in the darkness, watching the parking lot below. His vintage Mustang was parked under a lone street lamp. At 10:45 p.m., a hooded figure moved out of the shadows of the alleyway adjacent to the station. The figure moved quickly, hunched against the rain. They approached the Mustang. Isaiah watched from above, his heart rate steady. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch, this is Chief Sterling. I have a 1031 in the rear lot. Suspect is tampering with my personal vehicle. Do not send patrol. I repeat, do not send patrol. Send Detective Vance and the K9 unit to the rear exit. Silent approach." "Copy that, Chief," the dispatcher replied, sounding confused but obedient. Down in the lot, the hooded figure, it was Caleb, skinny and jittery, was fumbling with the lock of the Mustang. He used a slim gym tool, popping the lock in seconds. He opened the door, leaned in, and shoved a duct-taped brick under the driver's seat. He closed the door and sprinted away into the rain. Isaiah didn't chase him. He watched Caleb run toward a waiting sedan parked down the street. The sedan's headlights flickered on. "Brody," Isaiah thought. "You idiot." 10 minutes later, the sedan pulled away. Isaiah knew exactly what would happen next. Brody wouldn't call it in himself. He would wait. He would call an anonymous tip line in the morning, claiming the new chief was moving drugs. It was the oldest, dirtiest trick in the book. Isaiah walked downstairs. Detective Sarah Vance, no relation to the mayor, a coincidence she hated, was waiting by the back door with a German shepherd named Buster. "Chief," Vance asked, "what's going on?" "Someone just broke into my car," Isaiah said. "Buster, search." They walked to the Mustang. Isaiah opened the door. The wet footprints were visible on the floor mat. Buster immediately alerted, barking and scratching at the seat. Isaiah reached under and pulled out the brick. He cut a slit in the tape. White powder. "Cocaine," Vance said, her eyes widening. "A lot of it. Chief, this is a setup," Isaiah finished. "Bag it, fingerprint it, but don't log it into evidence yet." "Sir, if we book this now, the person who put it there gets away with attempted framing. I want the person who ordered it." Isaiah looked at the brick of cocaine. He felt a cold rage. This wasn't just an attack on his job. This was an attack on his freedom, his life. If he hadn't been watching, if he had driven home and been pulled over, he would be in a cell right now, his career over, his name destroyed. "Detective Vance," Isaiah said, "do we still have that tracker on the department fleet vehicles?" "Yes, sir. Pull the GPS history for Unit 402, Brody's old cruiser." "Brody turned in his keys, sir. The car is in the impound lot." "I know," Isaiah said. "But Brody has a personal truck, a black Ford F-150. Can we ping his cell phone?" "Only with a warrant, Chief. Get Judge Reynolds on the phone. Tell him I have probable cause for a conspiracy to commit a felony against a police officer. I want a warrant for Kyle Brody's phone location and his call logs from the last 24 hours. Friday morning. The trap was set. Brody was sitting in his truck across the street from the precinct, drinking coffee that tasted like ash. He was waiting. He had called the tip line at 7 a.m. using a voice modulator. "Chief Sterling keeps a brick of coke under his seat. Check the Mustang." He was waiting for the sirens. He was waiting for the chaos. He wanted to see the state police roll up and drag Sterling out in cuffs. He wanted his moment of glory. He checked his watch. 8:30 a.m. Why wasn't anything happening? Suddenly his phone rang. It was Higgins. "Brody, don't answer the door!" Higgins was screaming, hysterical. "What? I'm not home. I'm in my truck," Brody said. "What's wrong with you?" "They're here, Brody. IA. They just raided my house. They have everything. They have the texts." "What texts?" Brody's blood ran cold. "The texts where I told you to stop. The texts where you asked me for the evidence locker codes. They seized my phone. They know you planted it, Brody. They know." Brody dropped the phone. He looked up at the precinct. The front doors opened. It wasn't the state police coming for Isaiah. It was Isaiah coming for him. Isaiah Sterling walked out of the front entrance, flanked by Captain Reed, Detective Vance, and 4 tactical officers. They weren't looking around. They were looking directly at Brody's truck. Isaiah raised his hand and pointed. A siren chirped behind Brody. He spun around. A cruiser had pulled up behind his truck, blocking him in. Another pulled in front. Brody scrambled for the ignition, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't turn the key. He looked at the passenger seat where his personal Glock lay. "Don't do it," a tiny voice in his head screamed. "Don't die for this." But the hate was stronger than the fear. He reached for the gun. "Drop it." The glass of his driver's side window shattered as a baton smashed through it. A taser prong hit him in the neck. Brody convulsed, his muscles locking up, the world turning into a haze of pain and white noise. The door was ripped open. He was dragged out onto the wet asphalt, face first into a puddle. A heavy knee pressed into his back. "Kyle Brody," a voice read out, calm and cold. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to distribute narcotics, assault on a police officer, attempted entrapment, and corruption." Brody gasped for air, mud entering his mouth. He twisted his head to the side. He saw a pair of polished black shoes. He looked up. Isaiah Sterling stood over him. The chief didn't look angry anymore. He looked disappointed. "You really thought," Isaiah said, looking down at the man who had called him boy, "that you could plant drugs in a cop's car and get away with it? You didn't just break the law, Brody. You insulted my intelligence." Isaiah crouched down, bringing his face close to Brody's, mirroring the position from Sunday morning in the driveway. "You wanted to see me in cuffs, Kyle? You wanted to see a criminal?" Isaiah whispered. He reached into Brody's pocket and pulled out the burner phone Brody had used to call the tip line. "You should have looked in the mirror." Isaiah stood up and nodded to the officers. "Get him out of my sight. Book him, and make sure you check his ID. We wouldn't want to make a mistake." As they hauled Brody away, screaming obscenities, the entire precinct watched from the windows. The karma wasn't just hard, it was absolute. But the story wasn't over. The trial was coming. And Brody had one last desperate card to play, a secret that could burn the whole city down. 6 months had passed since the rain-soaked arrest in the precinct parking lot. Oakhaven had changed. The autumn leaves were falling, covering the streets in gold and crimson, but the atmosphere in the county courthouse was cold as steel. The trial of the people versus Kyle Brody had become a national spectacle. Media vans lined the streets. Protesters stood outside, some supporting the police, but the vast majority demanding accountability. Inside Courtroom 4B, the air was stale. Kyle Brody sat at the defense table. He had lost weight. His buzz cut had grown out into a patchy, unkempt mess. The arrogance that had defined him in the driver's seat of his cruiser was gone, replaced by a twitchy, hollow-eyed paranoia. Isaiah Sterling sat in the gallery, not the witness stand. He had already given his testimony, calm, factual, and devastating. He wore a grey suit today, not his uniform. He wanted the jury to see him as a man, not just a rank. Brodie's defense attorney, a slick, high-priced lawyer named Leonard Voke, was desperate. He had tried to get the case dismissed. He had tried to suppress the video evidence. He had tried to move the venue, all denied. Now, he was playing Brodie's final card. "Your Honor," Voke boomed, pacing in front of the jury. "My client is not a villain. He is a scapegoat, a pawn in a political game played by Mayor Vance and Chief Sterling to clean up the image of the city. Officer Brodie was ordered to target high-profile individuals to meet quotas. The drugs found in the chief's car, a setup planted not by my client, but by corrupt elements within the department looking to frame him. It was a bold, insanity-fueled lie. The secret Brodie had threatened to reveal was nothing more than a conspiracy theory he had concocted in his cell. But then came the prosecution's rebuttal. District Attorney Marcus Stone stood up. "The defense tells a good story," Stone said, adjusting his tie. "But we prefer evidence, and we have a witness who was in the room when the conspiracy was actually hatched." Stone turned to the bailiff. "The people call Sean Higgins." A murmur went through the courtroom. Brodie whipped his head around, his eyes wide with betrayal. He hadn't known. Higgins walked in. He looked broken. He was part of a plea deal, probation, and a permanent ban from law enforcement in exchange for full testimony. He wouldn't look at Brodie. "Mr. Higgins," Stone asked, "did anyone order Officer Brodie to plant drugs on Chief Sterling?" "No," Higgins whispered into the microphone. "Speak up, please." "No," Higgins said, his voice cracking. "Kyle." Officer Brodie. He was obsessed. After the arrest at the house, he couldn't handle the humiliation. He told me he was going to ruin the chief. He said if he couldn't be a cop, Sterling couldn't be one either. "And did he involve you?" "He asked me for the codes to the evidence locker. I refused. That's when he called Caleb Purnell." Brodie slammed his fist on the table. "You liar! You traitor! Order!" The judge banged his gavel. "Restrain the defendant!" Brodie was breathing heavily, his face red. The jury stared at him. They didn't see a victim. They saw a man with no control, a man consumed by hate. The final nail in the coffin came from the audio recording of the phone call Brodie had made to Purnell, the drug dealer. The jury listened to Brodie's voice, clear and distinct. "I want a bag of product. Coke, heroin, I don't care. Just enough to look like distribution weight." There was no coming back from that. The blue wall hadn't just cracked, it had crumbled, crushing Brodie underneath it. The verdict. It took the jury less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to distribute, attempted entrapment, perjury, assault on a police officer. The judge, the Honourable Arthur Reynolds, looked down at Brodie over his spectacles. "Mr. Brodie," Judge Reynolds said, his voice echoing in the silent room, "you were entrusted with a badge, a symbol of safety. You used it as a weapon of intimidation. You didn't just attack Isaiah Sterling. You attacked the very concept of justice. You profiled a man because of his race. And when he proved to be your superior, you tried to destroy his life rather than admit your mistake." Brodie stood there, trembling. "I sentence you to 15 years in the state penitentiary, without the possibility of parole for the first 10. Brodie's knees buckled. His attorney had to catch him. 15 years. He would be 47 when he got out. His life was effectively over. As the bailiffs moved in to cuff him, real handcuffs this time, not the prop he had used on Isaiah, Brodie looked back at the gallery. He found Isaiah's face. Isaiah didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, a gesture of finality. "Take him away," the judge ordered. The karma didn't end with the gavel. The real punishment began 2 weeks later. Brody was processed into the Northwood Correctional Facility. It wasn't a minimum security camp for white-collar criminals. It was general population. As Brody was walked down the cell block, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, the noise was deafening. Inmates banged on the bars. They yelled, they jeered. "Fresh meat! Hey, officer, remember me?" Brody kept his head down, clutching his thin mattress. He recognized voices. He recognized faces. There was Darnell, the kid he had planted a knife on 3 years ago. There was Old Man Miller, who Brody had beaten during a traffic stop. They were all there. The people he had wronged. The people he had treated like animals. Now, he was in the cage with them. He reached his cell. The heavy steel door slid shut with a resounding clang. Brody sat on the cot. He looked at the toilet in the corner. He looked at the graffiti on the wall. He realized with a terrifying clarity that there was no dashcam to turn off here. There was no union rep to call. There was no badge to hide behind. He was just a man. And he was all alone. The Reformation back in Oak Haven, the Sunday morning sun was shining again. Isaiah Sterling stood in the driveway of 44402 Crestview Lane. The garage door was open. His vintage Mustang sat gleaming inside, finally parked where it belonged. He was holding a cup of coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. A patrol car rolled down the street. It slowed down. The window rolled down. It was a new officer, a young woman named Alvarez, fresh out of the academy. She smiled. "Good morning, Chief," she called out. "Everything quiet?" "Quiet and peaceful, Officer Alvarez," Isaiah smiled back. "Carry on." She waved and drove off, using her turn signal, driving the speed limit. Isaiah took a sip of his coffee. The department was changing. It was slow work, hard work, but the toxic roots had been pulled up. The fear was gone from the community's eyes when they saw a cruiser. Trust was being rebuilt, brick by brick. Isaiah turned and walked back toward his house. He paused at the door, looking at the spot on the driveway where he had been forced to his knees 6 months ago. The memory was there, but the sting was gone. He had turned a moment of humiliation into a movement of justice. He had faced the worst of the system, and won. He walked inside his home and closed the door. The house was no longer empty. It was full of life, full of hope, and finally, it was safe. Justice is rarely swift, and it is rarely poetic. But in the case of Isaiah Sterling and Kyle Brody, the universe balanced the scales with terrifying precision. Brody thought his badge gave him the power to judge others based on their appearance. He thought he was untouchable. But he forgot the most important rule of power. It is a loan, not a gift. Isaiah Sterling didn't just beat Brody in court. He beat him by being the one thing Brody couldn't understand, a man of integrity. Brody is now sitting in a cell surrounded by the very people he mistreated, living a nightmare of his own making. The lesson? Arrogance blinds you, but karma always sees 20/20. If you believe that justice was served, and you want to see more stories where the underdog bites back, smash that like button right now. It helps the channel grow and lets us bring you more incredible true-to-life dramas. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always wins. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss what we have coming next. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.